Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'll keep saying it until folks, please find your seats. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to get started early, end on time. It's going to be great. If people could please find their seats. There are some more seats? Great. We'll let people sit. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jim Richardson. I'm the National Outreach Director for USGLC. I want to thank all of you for being here today, and a special thanks to our Pennsylvania Advisory Committee members who helped make this event possible, along with our co-host, which is the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia, and the Global Phila Association. Thanks so much for your participation. Lastly, I want to say special thanks to our three speakers today, Jen, General Trask, and of course, Congressman Boyle. More on them in a minute. So, welcome. This is a U.S. Global Leadership Coalition event. We've been around for 30 years, and we are a national, bipartisan coalition of political, military, business, civic, and faith-based leaders who make the case for robust, sustained global American engagement around the world. As a former boss used to always say, the world is on fire, so what are we going to do about it? The world has, as you can see on your evening news, global instability, transnational threats are really the headlines. So strategic investments in diplomacy and international assistance are vital foreign policy tools that help prevent crisis, save lives, and counter rivals like China, and help build strong economic and security partnerships that help America win around the world. USGLC is led by a National Advisory Council, which is chaired by Admiral Mike Mullins, who was the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that includes former Secretaries of State, Defense, and Treasury from both Republican and Democratic administration. What brings this broad coalition together is our shared recognition that America cannot afford to retreat from the world, given all that is at stake. So USGLC hosts events just like this all around the country. I want to do a special shout out to Derry, who is our local Philadelphia field rep, who helped make all of this happen. Philadelphia native, he's here right here, and he helps organize here in Pennsylvania. But we host all the events just like this around the country, sharing why this work is critical to America's national and economic security. No matter which person or party is in office, we work closely with members of Congress and the administration through small meetings, private roundtables, and large events, along with outreach mobilizations during key votes in Congress. But before we dive into today's panel, Congressman Boyle will join us on the stage here in a minute to deliver some remarks. But let me introduce all the speakers first, to be moderated by USGLC's very own and Philadelphia native Jason Gross, who is our Executive Director of USGLC. First on the panel is Jennifer Seiler, is a seasoned global health professional who's worked across the private and public sectors, currently serving as the U.S. Head of Corporate Government Affairs for GSK. She previously worked as a senior official for Sabon Vaccine, as well as the Innovation Task Team and Senior Partnership Advisor at USAID's Global Health Bureau, and we realized that we worked together at USAID at one point. Second up is Lieutenant General Thomas Trask. He's a dedicated Air Force veteran with almost 33 years of service to our nation and 3,000 flying hours as a combat pilot. He most recently served as the Vice Commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command, where he served in Washington and worked closely with the Office of the Secretary of Defense. His time at the U.S. Air Force included service to the U.S. Central Command as well as headquarters of the Air Force Special Operations Command and NATO Air South. Lastly, as our distinguished guest is Representative Brandon Boyle, who's serving his sixth term representing the Northeast Philadelphia in Congress. Most notably, Congressman Boyle serves as the ranking member of the House Budget Committee and is a member of the influential Ways and Means Committee. Although through his leadership on many congressional caucuses, as well as co-chair of the European Union and World Bank caucuses, as well as the lead Democrat for the U.S. congressional delegation to NATO Parliamentarian Assembly, as well as carrying forward Pennsylvania's rich legacy of promoting principled U.S. leadership around the world. But before we turn to the panel, I want to see if we do have the mayor. I'm going to filibuster for just 1 minute. You know, Congressman Boyle, he's a really... No, I have the privilege of doing this all around the country. I'm the national leader, so we have teams throughout the country that do these things. When you're able to actually work and make an introduction of a congressman that you actually respect, it is a true leader, both intellectually and a policy giant like you have here. You really should be proud of the leadership you have right here in Philadelphia. So, Congressman, thanks so much for your leadership, both Ways and Means, budget, and focusing on the international challenges that are facing our world. But with that, we're just going to go ahead and... She's here. Please welcome the mayor of Philadelphia.
Hello. Oh, I'm here.
Please.
Oh, wow.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Well, welcome to Philadelphia, you all. We give you time to breathe sometimes. It is definitely an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. I have to start by acknowledging some of my comrades who lead, and they are in the arena, are the following local and state officials present: Mark Squilla, Rue Landau, Nicholas O'Rourke, Hoestein, Bellman, Carroll, and Sharif Street. Can you give them a round of applause? Also have to acknowledge the people who also in the same boot camp. It's called the Parker Administration Boot Camp. Can all of my administration members stand? I want you to see who they are. And so, thank you to the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for bringing together such an extraordinary group of leaders from business and government, higher education, the military, nonprofit, and faith communities. I also want to offer a very special thank you to our event sponsors, the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia and Global Philadelphia, for helping to make today possible. Give them a huge shout out right now. That is important. And no pressure. I don't know where, oh, here he is. No pressure. But history says I was thinking about you. And I was telling someone, yes, he's the ranking member of the Budget Committee, and yes, he's a former state rep, but he's also my former colleague. And what you feel at this moment in our nation's history in representing Philadelphia, no Philadelphian other than the late, great Congressman, Reverend Dr. William H. Gray III, knows what it's like, Congressmember Boyle, to be sitting in your seat. And I want you to know we are grateful for you and your leaderships. Give him a round of applause. Governor Swiker, no pressure. The mayor calls you, you answer. Every time we call, we ask you to deliver. Give it up for one, Swiker. He knows. He knows. These are the bipartisan co-chairs of the Pennsylvania Advisory Committee, and I want to thank you both for your leadership in ensuring that Philadelphia has a strong voice on the global stage. And I don't think he's here, but Congressman Pat Murphy, I don't think he's present today, but we're grateful also for his years of leadership and his commitment to this coalition. So give him a shout out now as well. Give him a shout out. And there's somebody who's saying, this mayor is thanking everyone. If you know what it's like to be mayor of the city of Philadelphia during this time in our nation's history, you know that the two most important words that a mayor can say to anyone in any language, especially right here in Philadelphia right now, are thank you. So to Lieutenant General Thomas Trask and Jennifer Seiler and Lauren Swartz, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia, thank you for your work. Give them all a rousing round of applause. Now listen, there is no better place to have this conversation right now than right here, just steps away from Independence Hall, where this bold idea about democracy changed the course of history. And as Philadelphia's 100th mayor, during this historic 250th anniversary, I do think about our history every day, but I think even more, and I feel even more, the responsibility of us all sort of coming together to figure out what is next. As leaders, we all honor the shoulders that we stand on. We embrace the responsibility to build something that's even stronger for the next generation. And then here lies another realization. We don't have to choose between being America's birthplace and America's future. We don't have to make that choice. Philadelphia is proving at this moment, which is why your convening is so essential. We are proving that we can be both. So when I wake up in the morning focused on those central promises, nothing important, but what local leaders think about. How do we make the city safer? How do we make it cleaner and greener and bring that economic opportunity for all? And it does sound a little bit like local priorities to some, but in today's economic environment, guess what I've learned? They're global priorities too. Let me give you a quick snapshot of what I'm referencing. As we prepared to welcome the world for the FIFA World Cup, we had a challenge in the city of Philadelphia. And I want you to have some perspective here. Where would we host a fan festival, right, that was worthy of one of the world's biggest sporting events? We could have done what everyone expected. Another Center City Festival, right? Instead, we asked, what haven't we imagined yet? And then that's when one of our own, which is why acknowledging the members I'm in the foxhole with every day is extremely important. One of our own, his name is Bob Allen, working with our Office of Special Events and then Parks and Rec and other employees, city employees across the administration. Congressman, they said, wait, working with our partners at Philly Soccer 2026, they saw an opportunity that other people hadn't seen. And they didn't see that Lemon Hill could be a potential. They knew what it was, but they didn't see what it could become. So together, they all get together and they transform it into the nation's leading free FIFA fan festival for 39 days, and more than 500,000 people came together there. That was important. Now listen, they came for soccer, but they stayed for Philadelphia. They experienced the warmth of our neighborhoods, the pride of our people, and the unmistakable spirit of our city, now that the world has come to see. And just maybe for a moment, Philadelphia, we saw ourselves the same way the world saw us. They came to experience our history, but they left believing in our future. And that's what happens when our city believes in itself. And something else happened too. When people experienced Philadelphia, Congressman Boyle, you know this, they began investing in Philadelphia. And if you need proof, I want you to think about Bonduelle. I want you to think about Hanwha. I want you to think about Rhodes Industries. I want you to think about TerraPower, different industries, different countries, one decision, Philadelphia. Our world-class universities, hospitals, research institutions, innovative firms like GSK, they continue connecting Philadelphia to the global economy while creating opportunity right here at home. Pennsylvania, and I don't know how many of you in the room know this, but Commerce does. Pennsylvania exports nearly $80 billion in goods and services every year. And Philadelphia is undeniably one of the engines that help to drive that success. So for generations, Philadelphia helped to build America. Well, guess what? Today, Philadelphia is helping to build what's next. And nowhere is that more evident than what we're seeing in Lower South. We're writing the next chapter of Philadelphia's economy through advanced manufacturing, shipbuilding, maritime, commerce, life sciences, logistics, and energy innovation. Together, investments across Lower South have the potential to create, and I need you all to say it with me. Let me hear you say 60,000 jobs, 60,000 jobs for Philadelphians and others in our region. That's not one project. That's real opportunity. Opportunity that our residents can see, touch, and feel. And I see someone in the back to the right, and you know this is important to me. Through what we've developed called PHL Prime. Repeat it with me, PHL Prime. PHL Prime. We're making sure, now this is like a confession in the middle of therapy. We're making sure that government moves at the speed of business by removing barriers and bringing agencies together and helping transformational investments move faster. Because companies deserve partners and not obstacles, so our message is simple. Philadelphia is open for business, and finally, the world is taking notice. Every ship launched, every company that echoes Philadelphia, every investment that creates opportunity, every family that can build a brighter future because of that opportunity, that's why we do this work. So the founders who gathered just steps from here, they understood something profound. America is stronger when we work together across differences, across communities, across generations, and that same spirit is in this room today. It brings us together so that we can lead together, we can compete together, and we can build together. Because when America leads, Philadelphia grows. And when Philadelphia grows, America grows strong. I thank Congressmember Boyle, along with Governor Schweiker, and all of the stakeholders for making this happen. This room is what I mean when you hear me say one Philly, a united city. That's what I desire for us to be. And then we become a model for the nation in affirming that together we can build and be one America. a united nation. And so now, with all of the powers that are invested in me, in this room, with all of these executives, Congressman Boyer and Governor Swiker, everyone is required to put one finger in the air right now. Greg Karen, you had to see the ones at the Phillies game. They were great. And I've got to practice. I went viral for misspelling Eagle, so I got to practice things now. Let me hear you all repeat after me. We're going to practice softly. One Philly, a united city, one America, a united nation. I think I'm ready. This is for the gram. Put the ones up high. If it's not on the gram, it didn't happen. Let me hear you all say one Philly, a united city, one America, a united nation. Welcome to Philadelphia, and thank you to my congressman, the ranking member of the Budget Committee. No pressure. We love you and appreciate you. And to Governor Swiker, thank you all for your leadership.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Congressman Boyle.
I think, well, I know we're, our schedule is a bit off, so I'll just truncate what I was planning to say so we can get to the panel. Let me first say, Madam Mayor, to you and to everyone who was involved over these last several months in this great citywide and region-wide effort, let me observe what a remarkable few months Philadelphia as a city and a region has had. Absolutely remarkable. From the March Madness games through the PGA Championship, through, of course, the World Cup, 6 successful games that were hosted here, and most recently the Major League Baseball Home Run Derby and All-Star Game. I had the great pride that every born and raised Philadelphian will understand to observe that on social media, people from New York and Boston were bitching about the way their cities hosted the World Cup and said, why can't we be more like Philadelphia? It's music to my ears. And then, most directly involving me, it was just 2 weeks ago that I hosted the culmination of a 2-year effort, but brought about 40 of my colleagues in Congress back to where it all began. For only the second time since 1800, members of Congress had a session in Independence Hall and Congress Hall. A truly, I have goosebumps even talking about it, a remarkable moment. By the way, a roughly equal number of Democratic members and Republican members were in that room. And to a person, they all remarked and have subsequently said this to me since we've been back to Washington, that it was truly one of the highlights of their career in service. So this is a sign that, yes, Philadelphia is, and I say this with pride again as someone who's born and raised here, who moved back after college and graduate school and chose to raise my family here and launch my career here. Philadelphia is in many ways the biggest small town in the world. A city in which most of us have deep roots in this city, in our neighborhoods, that understand its culture, are passionate about defending all things Philadelphia. And yet, that is no excuse whatsoever as to why we can't be one of the major cities on the global stage. And it was to that end 2 years ago, literally right in this room, that I, in the time serving as a chairman of one of the main committees in the NATO Parliament, decided to bring my colleagues, these are members of Parliament from Europe as well as Canada, who serve in their own home countries' parliaments, the same way I serve in Congress, but also, along with me and 200 others, serve in the NATO Parliament, where we do pretty major work, and often what you see at the NATO Annual Summit is a reflection of the work that we've put in through our sessions through the course of the year. So we literally had right in this room, the blinds were up then, we could see and overlook Independence Mall and Independence Hall. We were able to meet here in an all-day session working on some of the most important issues facing NATO today, the greatest defensive alliance in human history. I intend, whether it is, and Mayor, I hope you're not jinxing anything, but if just so happens a few months from now, certain election results go a certain way, hypothetically speaking, then I will be the next chair of the House Budget Committee and will also be the next head of the U.S. delegation to the NATO Parliament. You saw me looking around. I was trying to find wood to knock on as I was saying that. But if that is the case, I have many plans for both of those roles, one of which absolutely is to leverage both of those roles to bring more colleagues, whether from Congress or from the NATO Parliament, here to Philadelphia, to show off our city, to show off our region, and why truly the 21st century can be Philadelphia's greatest century. Thank you. There we go. All right. I tried to get us back on time.
You did a great job. Welcome, everyone. So great to have this great crowd here with us. It's an honor as a native son of this city who grew up 6 blocks away in Washington Square to come back wearing my Kelly Green, almost Kelly Green tie, go Birds, and to know it, and to really recognize a leader you have in Congress on foreign policy. And let's start with that, Congressman. After your opening remarks, you grew up in the Olney neighborhood, son of an Irish immigrant. You've been a champion for the Friends of Ireland in Congress, champion of the Good Friday Agreement, and you've taken a whole range of foreign policy issues as well. Your story isn't a uniquely Philadelphia story in this case. In this crowd today, many constituents who have connections to the world from their family history, from their profession, from their values. But when we come to you, what explains that? What from your personal, your professional experience has driven you to lead on these policy issues and demonstrate that what happens around the world matters to the lives of Philadelphians, Pennsylvanians, and to all Americans?
Yeah, well, first, let me just echo. Looking out, I have a number of friends and constituents in the audience, but this is an incredibly impressive group, so it is humbling to get to speak before such a collection of prominent Philadelphians. I have a funny anecdote to answer your question. So I was elected in 2014. I had started off 32 points behind. It was a chiefly Democratic district at the time, part in Philadelphia, part in Montgomery County. And a very long story, a 14-month story, driven down very short, was able to pull off an upset, even though all 3 of my opponents had raised and spent more money, and was able to win. So a lot of the DC establishment was behind the main frontrunner, who was a former congresswoman. And so I get to DC a few weeks after the primary, and I'm making the rounds, having meetings with a bunch of senior Democrats, none of whom were supporting me. And but I explained to them, look, I'm a professional. I've been a state rep at the time. I get it. Let's work together. And one of these individuals, I'll talk about this now, is retiring. Steny Hoyer had been an enthusiastic. He was the number 2 Democrat then, and very powerful member of Congress. And he said, well, look, you're being being really gracious about this. Committee assignments, how can I help you? I said, well, eventually I really want to be on Ways and Means Committee. I understand freshmen don't get on Ways and Means or anything like that. So, the next couple of years, I really want to serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I have a strong interest in foreign affairs. And Sherelle, you'll appreciate this. He went, huh, really? And looked at me like I was nuts. And then he said, you're from Philadelphia, right? And I said, yes, well, I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. It's part of my district. Why? And he said, son, I've been a member of Congress for 35 years. I've never known any member of Congress to give a rat's ass about foreign affairs. Now, he was saying it a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I have to say, I was a little embarrassed. when I left that and tried not to take offense. But it showed me that, geez, you know, we really need to raise our game. And the way we are thought of needs to be not just as a place that rightly cares about infrastructure and transportation and you know, more parochial matters, but we can do better. And so I really have since then vowed that I would play an active role in foreign affairs. I think there are too few of my colleagues, actually, who tend to be active in these areas, and served in the foreign affairs for 2 terms, then joined the NATO parliamentary congressional delegation. And so I look at it as we're the world's leader, the U.S., in terms of economy and military strength, but we're only 4% of the world's population. We tend to matter a lot more to the world than I think most Americans tend to realize or be cognizant of, because understandably, they are thinking of their own life, daily issues that they have to get through. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Sure. We can be active on domestic affairs, but also recognize the unique role the United States plays, and we need to play that role very carefully. Because if we don't, then it can have all sorts of consequences, some of which we are seeing play out right now on the world stage.
Indeed. Well, your constituents are grateful for the choices you've made, the leadership you've shown, and why we're here today too, and we're going to continue this conversation. Jen, we heard about your background as well, pretty diverse. You've consulted in Kenya and India. You have worked at Global Health Division at USAID. You now head government affairs for GSK. Tell us how these varied experiences in your professional career have led you to understand the importance of global health security, of working on global health that saves lives abroad and also does so much for us here at home.
Yeah. Thank you, USGLC, for hosting this just critical conversation and for hosting it just 1 mile from our US headquarters. So I appreciate making it really easy for me to be here, and what an honor to be on a panel with you both. So I think a good example of, so I spent several years at USAID running a team focused on innovation, bringing private sector engagement into global health. And the way that we did that really was through grand challenges. So we would take some of the knottiest challenges you could imagine happening abroad and say, let's shine a light on this and see what innovations and interventions exist so that we can fund those and solve these challenges. So one of those examples was with our Fighting Ebola Grand Challenge, and we invested in about a dozen, mainly US university students and startups to work on challenges we were experiencing back in 2014 to 2016 in the West Africa Ebola crisis, so in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. And as part of this, these were some of the hardest challenges on how can we keep our healthcare workers alive? How do we keep ourselves safe? How do we keep folks on the ground safe? How do we keep the Americans safe that are there? And brought over about 6 US university students and startup folks over the course of a year and a half, brought them into Ebola treatment centers to say, what is going on? How are we going to take these challenges and actually help resolve them in partnership with communities? We did a lot of amazing work there, but nothing compares to what I felt when I was on the ground. There were 2 things. One, US was at the center of responding to everything. They ran the response management team alongside DOD, State Department, USAID, CDC. They were at the center, and they had the absolute trust of the local governments, the healthcare workers, everybody. And that was not a snap, right? Like the outbreak happened, but it was clear that these relationships had been built over decades and decades and decades. And so that trust existed. And that can't be replaced, right? So we were hand in hand with them, understanding, CDC was the first call in each of those countries when the outbreak hit. And so we knew first also how to keep Americans safe because we were on the ground, we understood what the issues were. A second example is just CDC's role in the laboratories on the ground. They were the ones studying the survivors of Ebola to say, hey, how is this virus acting? How is it staying in the human body? They were at the center of the science. We at the US knew more about kind of what was happening with Ebola than anyone else. So we were able to protect the communities, we were protecting ourselves, and we were also able to understand what other partners around the world were kind of seeing. So I use this as an example just to say, I think there's a versatility that the U.S. has abroad, and I will share a bit more later on how Pennsylvania comes into this, but there's a versatility that we've had, and I want to continue to hold through this. I want us to continue being the first call.
Thank you, Jen. General Trask, 33 years in the Air Force. You are one of 280 retired 3- and 4-star generals and admirals that make up USGLC's National Security Advisory Council. Distinguished hard power career, led execution planning at U.S. Special Operations Command, conducted 51 combat missions, Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq, Panama. Impeccable hard power credentials. What's your understanding of, from this perspective now, of how our civilian power also is so important to our national security, our State Department, our international assistance programs? What have you learned from your time in the field?
Yeah, Jason, hey, thanks first for inviting me on. I will tell you, one of the easiest decisions I made after retiring was the invitation to come and join the Advisory Council with GLC, because I had an understanding already of how important this mission is that you all have. My background is in special operations. That's where I grew up, and there's kind of a kindredship between our diplomatic efforts and special operations, because they're typically the elements that are going to be there before a conflict becomes a conflict, when maybe it's just a crisis. And an appropriate reaction to that crisis can prevent the conflict from ever happening. And that's a specific role to special operations forces in our military. And whenever the crisis occurs and the special operations guys get called, the first question is, who do we know there? What U.S. agencies are already there? What are the contacts we have? What's the relationship with the country team in that nation? What are the NGOs that are there that we can also leverage? And hopefully, we've also built through mill-to-mill relationships our own expertise, our own relationships with that region. The problem is you can't know what next year's crisis is going to be. Right? So you have to be prepared for all of that ahead of time. And it takes a long time to build the trust and the relationships that you talked about, Jen. And if we don't have our military forces forward, just like if we don't have a strong country team and a strong diplomatic effort in any place that might be a crisis next year, we won't be prepared. We'll be stuck just going straight to the major conflict. And it's one thing to prepare to win the next war, but if we can spend a little bit of our effort and our money trying to make sure that that major conflict doesn't happen, I think that's a pretty good investment.
Thank you, sir. I want to turn to the Congressman and the General about NATO and Kosovo. As you said, you've taken the time to be the lead Democrat on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly Committee. World's eyes were on NATO after Ankara. I want to read just a couple of quick quotes of what you said recently. The importance of our relationship with NATO, to resist that isolationist tendency because it's a terrible mistake, arguing that investing in NATO today is a drop in the bucket compared to what we would have to pay if we had to fight another major war. About Ukraine, you said Ukraine can still win, but only if NATO remains united and the United States leads with strength and clarity. What are the stakes for America to continue its leadership role in NATO going into the 21st century? And what are the stakes if Russia defeats Ukraine on the battlefield?
So first, there's an old joke, it's a little bit dated now, that the real purpose of NATO, the joke used to go, was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans divided. Now you can see it's a dated reference, obviously, because the Germans, post-1989, fortunately, and thank God, did unite and the wall came down. But the other two are still very much operable, to keep the Russians out and the Americans in. Because, and I'm always struck by how similar the 2020s are to the 1920s. The hallmark of the 1920s was really a few isms. Nativism was actually the height of the KKK, was the 1920s. And it was mostly about anti-immigration fervor, added on to the original KKK of the late 19th century, which of course was deeply anti-African American. But the KKK reached its height in membership, including electing members of Congress, including have the elected governor of Indiana, and playing a major role at the 1924 Democratic Convention, the longest in American history. So nativism, number one, Protectionism, number two, we right now have the highest tariffs today than we've had since the 1920s, 1930s. And then third, isolationism. After the 1920s and 1930s, particularly because of the trauma of World War I, America withdrew from the rest of the world. America gave in to that temptation. One of the many great Mark Twain lines was that, well, America really only has two great friends in the world, Miss Atlantic and Mr. Pacific. So there has always been that tendency in American history to say, look, the rest of the world is messy. We're in between two great oceans. Let's just forget about them and let's just worry about ourselves. The problem with that spirit and that mentality is that we bring about something that happened and caused World War II. Out of the World War II experience, we vowed never again would we repeat that mistake. Nor would we put down the defeated party in a world war, but in fact we would help their population rebuild, which is what we very wisely and courageously did both in Germany and Japan, two of our largest trading partners today. And indeed, for the last 80 years, we have lived in the world that we have built. We created, with our partners, NATO. We created the World Bank. We created the IMF. And we led the creation of the United Nations. Now, after 8 decades, this whole world infrastructure we created is being challenged, and it's mostly being challenged from within. So I think that those of us who believe that the United States needs to play a world working with our allies, we need to be more vocal about the benefits of that, because God knows the people who demagogue it are being incredibly vocal. I am deeply worried at this moment that the United States under this administration will withdraw from NATO. Now, on that point, I would point out that in 2021, 2022, Congress, after facing the last threat of this, passed bipartisan legislation to ensure that congressional authority and approval was needed in order to withdraw the United States from NATO. So we at least have that protection, at least on paper. But I'm concerned about the sort of quiet quitting possibility, which is that this administration doesn't formally withdraw us from NATO, but you have dramatic troop reductions to the point that we will have de facto withdrawn from NATO. So one of my main focuses in terms of my leadership of the Democrats in the NATO Parliament is to, yes, make sure we're strong in facing that threat externally, which is most chiefly from Vladimir Putin's Russia, but also make sure that we address the threat that we face internally.
And well worth applause on that, too. Just to add to that, as you know, Congressman, 13 of our top 15 export markets once were recipients of U.S. foreign assistance. It shows the long game of when we engage over there, too. And in Ukraine, quickly as well, I mean, you've said the security of the United States depends on Ukraine winning. You still agree on that, right?
Yeah, I'll make this very brief so we can work in my fellow panelists here. But the fight in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. It's about the entire security and freedom of Europe and the entire security and freedom of the Western world. We need to realize that. Certainly those in Poland realize it. Certainly those in the Baltics realize it. I had one member of parliament, she was actually American-born, part of the Latvian diaspora. She grew up in the New York City area. And when the Soviet Union fell apart, mostly because the Baltics led the way in breaking away from the Soviet Union in the early 90s, she went back to Latvia and has lived there ever since and has played a role, as I said, as a member of their parliament. In this room, because she was here when I brought them here 2 years ago, she pulled me aside and said, Brendan, if the U.S. falls, it's all over for my country. That's the role that we play for the defense of Europe and the free world.
Thank you. General Trask, you served there. Missions in Kosovo and Bosnia. tell us again the stakes here for our long-term NATO relationship and the stakes for Ukraine right now.
Interestingly, the first time I worked with the Ukrainians was in Bosnia. And the Ukrainians were actually supporting a UN mission, UNTAS, if you remember, on the northern border of Croatia and Serbia with units. And so I made friends there working with those guys. We were providing close air support for the UN mission in the north. And the Ukrainians were there. One of the guys that was there, I ended up going to the War College with. I had the hardship tour of having to go to Rome, Italy for a year for War College to the NATO Defense College.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, it was tough. But he ended up in the class. And his one mission of attending the War College there, at the time, obviously Ukraine still is not a NATO member, and he was the worst War College student you can imagine, didn't really read any of the material or pay attention. His one goal was to convince all the members of the class from all the nations represented that if Ukraine doesn't become a member of NATO, it will be invaded by Russia. This was in 2001. Obviously, that he was right. It didn't happen, and the invasion happened. The good news was through the diplomatic and the military-to-military relationships that were built, specifically with him, but with obviously many others, we were able to make sure that Ukraine was prepared. There's been a long, particularly in special operations again, training relationship over the last 15 to 20 years. Which is, I think, one of the major reasons why Ukraine surprised everybody and how well they performed when that invasion happened. That was because of the diplomatic and the mill-to-mill relationships that happened in the years previous to that. Again, if we don't do that well in advance, you're not going to have the leverage of being able to take advantage of that when the time comes.
I want to get to one more question to you and to Jen before we get to your wrap. To stay on time we have right now. I want to turn to global health, which Jen started us off on. And as she said, from GSK's perspective, her perspective, USAID, you don't stand up defenses to Ebola overnight. It's over years of our engagement with programs like PEPFAR, saving 25 million lives, investing in surveillance, laboratories, trained health workers, trusted international partnerships. First to you, Congressman, when you talk about with your colleagues about why we need to be out on offense to invest in global health security so these diseases don't come to our shores. How are they received on that? How do you make that argument? How are they listening both on a bipartisan basis right now in Congress?
Well, first, I so credit the work that you did at USAID, that all those, ever since it was created by President Kennedy in the early 60s, and we created it at that time not just as a reflection of our values of wanting to help the most unfortunate, the people in the most unfortunate circumstances around the world, but we also created it out of our own enlightened self-interest as a tool to advance U.S. diplomatic efforts in the context of the Cold War. That then the Soviet Union was really getting a foothold in what was then called the Third World, now we would call the developing world. President Kennedy understood, and leaders, forerunners of mine in Congress understood, we needed to do this so that we would be able to project influence around the world. And the millions, indeed tens of millions of people that we have helped ever since then, to think that now all of that has been shuttered. There have been a lot of things, and I'm attempting to stay nonpartisan here. There have been a lot of things, obviously, over the last 18 months of this administration that I've disagreed with. Few have as far-reaching and as disastrous consequences as the shuttering of USAID. That, coupled with some of the inane decisions by HHS right now, I fear will come to bite us, Americans living here, in terms of the work that is not being done now in order to identify diseases and, God forbid, the next pandemic.
Jen, can you build on that? And let me just say, for GSK has supplied over 1.2 million vaccine doses to Gavi, the global alliance on vaccines since 2010, developing a second-generation malaria vaccine last year. What does that kind of investment do to save lives overseas and mean about jobs also back here in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia?
Absolutely, and it's actually $1.3 billion
Thank you.
we've reached, which is great. I get to add a B there.
I love it.
And so we have
Breaking news.
we have a goal of reaching 2.5 billion people by 2030, so we're working up to that. 4 years left. And it's been in large part a significant partnership with Pennsylvania. I mean, we have our largest footprint, so globally, GSK is headquartered in the UK, but our US headquarters is here in PA. Our largest employee footprint is in the United States, and our largest footprint by state is here in PA, with a third of our employees here. And a lot of the work we do, we have a lot of specialty focus in oncology and other things, but we have vaccine sites and some of our global health products produced in PA that make it to the farthest regions in the world, saving lives that otherwise wouldn't be saved. When I worked at the Sabin Vaccine Institute, we used to call it, there was a number of zero-dose children, the children in a community that hadn't been reached with 1 dose of vaccine. And Gavi does an incredible job of reaching those zero-dose children who would otherwise probably pass from a vaccine-preventable disease. And we are so thankful for mechanisms like Gavi, for US government, who's helped to build up these systems to make all of that possible. I have a fact, which I'm not sure everyone knows in this room, which is that the oldest, not that a lot of people are thinking about vaccine manufacturing every day, but if you are, the oldest vaccine manufacturing site is in Pennsylvania, in Marietta. It was built in 1882. We took it over just a few years later, 2005. But one in 4 vaccines that make it around the country come from Pennsylvania, and it reaches 88 countries around the world. There is so much that Pennsylvania has done, and the Philly area in particular, that has incentivized and driven us to be here, biopharma to be here. And so I think there's a lot of space for us to continue thinking about how do we maintain that market, because it makes sense for us, dollars and cents, but it's also the right and good thing to do.
Absolutely right. Congressman, we could go on for hours here on the number of challenges out there in foreign policy you're leading on. We have humanitarian crises in Sudan, Haiti, Venezuela after the earthquake, all around the world. So, and these conversations tend to go in that direction. But to close out for your time right now that you've had, I want to think more optimistic about what are you optimistic about in terms of, you talked about how you want to lead on NATO as well, but as the mayor started us off today, this is a city that has been to the center of the world, you know, the last month, the envy of the world in terms of hosting Cote d'Ivoire, you know, France, Croatia, peoples of the world coming here to celebrate in the fan zone at the link. Wall Street Journal, New York Times calling Philadelphia the destination in 2026. How do you feel about that? We're right now in the heart of the birthplace of democracy right now in Independence Square. What is it that you want to do, the city wants to do, to work with the world, to lead the world towards these better outcomes we're talking about, and your role as a foreign policy leader in Congress for hopefully many years to come as well for your constituents?
Well, we are the nation's birthplace, and that is a phrase, feel free to borrow that, Sherelle, put it on signs. The same way, every time you fly into Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, Philadelphia, the nation's birthplace. And, you know, we have these, what we call CODELs, is an acronym for Congressional Delegation Trips abroad. And anytime I'm traveling with my colleagues, and by the way, as law, every CODEL from Congress has to be bipartisan. And so, you know, as you can imagine, a 3-day CODEL, 5-day CODEL, you are meeting with a lot of people. In every single meeting, whether the folks from abroad I'm meeting with are active on foreign affairs or economic issues or whatever, I say, well, I'm a member of Congress from Philadelphia, the nation's birthplace. And so by the time we get done, all of my colleagues in Congress, they're like, anytime I hear Philadelphia now, I immediately associate it with the nation's birthplace, the nation's birthplace. So we're continuing to get that out. But that also does not mean it can inhibit us, as I said before, from playing such a major role in terms of our peer cities on the global stage. And the fact, you referenced earlier my family's immigrant background, my father and my mother's parents, the fact that so many Philadelphians, indeed so many Americans, have our roots from abroad, and that is more so in this city than in many other places, that's all the more reason for us to be a natural bridge with folks all around the world. Final point that I'll make in terms of optimism, because a lot of times what we see, whether it's in our domestic politics or international politics, gives reason for pessimism or at least concern. I am incredibly optimistic when it comes to Ukraine. Right now as we speak, Ukraine is winning the war and Russia is losing. That is remarkable. We are 4.5 years into the full-scale war. I never say the war because, of course, Russia took over Crimea and invaded the Donbass more than a decade ago. But ever since February 2022, about 4.5 years ago, since the full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine has done a remarkable job resisting Russian aggression and holding them back and having, pretty rough status between the two. Now at this moment, in large part because Ukraine on the fly has reinvented warfare through drones, Ukraine is actually winning the war. And I'll leave you with this. I've never been more optimistic than ever. Ukraine will ultimately win this, and it will be the end of Vladimir Putin.
Great way to end. Jennifer Seiler, General Trask, Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you for a great conversation today. Thank you all for coming out today. We'll continue this conversation for years to come. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great job.